Welcome to Microphone Check with J and Q, where no topic is off limits. This honest and safe space was created for you to be objectively evaluate the things in your life for the purpose of growth, healing, and success. I'm JB and he's Q. What's going on with you, man?
What's going on, JB? How you doing today?
Keeping my head up, man. Keeping my head up. Looking forward to this discussion.
Yes, sir. I think it's going to be a hot topic today. Already have gotten a lot of feedback on my social media platform. So just looking to see what's on your mind and ready to post this video so that we can get the audience view.
That's right. That's right. So here's what's in our mind. Can family be toxic and should they be cut off? Can family be toxic and should they be cut off? So I'll start. I think we may, from knowing you, we may have a little difference of opinion about this somewhat. But I believe the short answer to both of those questions, can family be toxic? Yes, certainly they can be toxic and should be identified as such when they are. And should they be cut off? I'm like, that's like, I'm not all the way like, yeah, they should be cut off. And maybe they should stay on. So I'll coin my comments though by saying that whatever I say is not to say that you don't value family. So I'm not saying that by my comments. So I'll put that out there because I know you value family just as much as I do. So I'm not saying that. So I'll go off and say, well, family can be toxic. Many people have already experienced it. So using I statements, I've experienced toxic family myself. Toxic could be defined, toxic behavior could be defined as anything that is harmful, behavior that is harmful to your state of peace, happiness, your being. You can find toxic behavior anywhere and everywhere to include family. Should they be cut off? The reason I say, I'm like, because for me, I give family maybe to a fault more chances than they probably should get, or more chances than I know I give people that are not blood relatives. That's why I'm defining family as blood relatives or adopted relatives. So I give them more. I give them more rope than I would normally, and it's for me. It could be hard because I want to make it work. I feel like if I cut them off, then I'm cutting the chance of making it work. So that's my introduction to the questions. Where are you at with this?
So. Like you mentioned, this is absolutely a hot topic, right? And though I agree with part of what you said, there are some things that I may disagree on, and not necessarily say disagree on, but probably. And I think that absolutely family can be toxic. 100% family can be toxic. And I think also that when it does come to a toxic family, we have to learn to start establishing boundaries, right? And in establishing those boundaries, you have to be firm in holding those boundaries, holding the people accountable when they try to cross those boundaries. But then you have to ask yourself, how many times do I allow this person to break the boundaries before there's consequences? Obviously, we don't want to permanently cut family off because they're still your blood relative. You still have, those relationships with them, those bonds with them. But how much do you take before it started affecting you both physically and mentally? Because believe it or not, there's a physical and a mental aspect to this. And I don't think anyone should allow their family members to cross those boundaries so much so that it begins to cause turmoil within your own home or within you yourself. So that's why it's important to establish those boundaries. Now, once those boundaries are crossed, you have to enforce those consequences. And if your family know that one of the consequences is that, hey, you don't have access to me or my family, then they have chosen that consequence, because we've established from the very beginning that, hey, this is the boundaries. You crossed the boundaries. You knew the consequences. So therefore, you chose the consequences.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Well, I guess when I'll see. Well, one, I don't see anything wrong with boundaries. I think boundaries should be set for any
Mhm.
type of relationship, marital relationship,
Correct.
boundaries, children relationship, boundaries, friendships, boundaries. You know, all this.
Boundary.
Boundaries
Hmm.
are necessary when you're engaged in some any type of relationship or connection with people. Uh, I guess, do you agree? Or I guess in your case, like I said earlier, I give more rope to family members than I give anybody else. Do you like everybody get the same amount of rope, or do you allow family members to
No,
get more leeway?
no. Obviously, I do give more leeway to family, and not just families. You can even throw in strong friendships in there as well. I give more leeway to those categories, because obviously I use the word friendship not so loosely. So if I use the word friend towards you, then you are a friend indeed. And I treat my friends like I treat family. So I will even give that same consideration to my strong bonds that I have with my friends. But like I said, the important thing though is to establish those boundaries.
Mhm.
And if my friend or if my family member continues to break those boundaries, then there has to be a consequence. And the burden should not be on me all the time, right? So sometimes your family and your friends have to share the burdens of their own choices.
And you know what? I always kind of like, okay, let me be the bigger person. Let me be the bigger person about this. So the bigger person means, I don't have to wait for the other person to to ask for forgiveness. I don't have to wait for the other person to change. I could take it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I could take this. I guess when I get to the point to where I can't take it, which some may seem that I should have gotten to that place a lot earlier than I could say cut off,
Mhm.
and that'll be how long that cutoff will be. I don't know, but I kind of like try to be the bigger person. And I'm not saying that cutting off people don't make you not a bigger person, but I guess for me, when I say I'm gonna be the bigger person, I mean the intentional. When we say intentional, I'm going to try to make this work. I'm going to put a lot of effort into making this work. Um, and in
Mhm.
making this work, I may take some damage. You know what I mean? And that's kind of
Yeah.
I guess my approach a little bit to it.
So when I think of the word cutoff, when it relates to family, right? It doesn't mean that you're totally exiled from my life, right? Um, to be cut off does not mean that you're not forgiven. I think forgiving someone is a powerful tool. In fact, I will always forgive people. But just because I forgive you, don't mean that I have to, on a daily basis, communicate with you. It doesn't mean that I can't every once in a while drop a line and say, "Hey, thinking about you, how you doing?" Because I think those things are still important. Because even though we use the word "cut off," I think that it's still important to keep that open line of communication. Because I believe that people do change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, change, in my opinion, is one of those things that is very inevitable, right? We are continuously changing. So people do change. So I would never permanently say that someone is exiled from my life, but I still have the mindset that you're forgiven, because your forgiveness is tied to my blessings. So you're forgiven, because I'm not going to block my blessings because of you.
But you don't control that
Make
space.
that clear. Make that clear. I would not block my blessings because of you, so you're forgiven. But just because you're forgiven does not mean that I have to give you or grant you access to my life at that particular time. Once you cross those boundaries, now it's up to me to dictate when I want to deal with you. That's what cut off to me looks like. I choose now when I deal with you and not the other way around.
Also, I also have to ask people to like give an example. Like when they call someone, or if I call someone toxic in my family, like you're a toxic person. My family member is a toxic person. I follow up with what was toxic, because I think people begin to use toxic as just a popular word, a popular thing to say now, right?
Yeah, one of those coin phrases.
Yeah, and so I say, what really was toxic? So if I know sometimes people will get called toxic when they're trying to help somebody out, though, trying to better yourself, but because I'm not always backing you, not always supporting you in the way you feel like I should, I may be toxic because I'm telling you, nah, you really shouldn't do that. Maybe you should straighten up and tighten up, be better about yourself. And that hardness of approaching you to do better, one could be called toxic. And so I believe that when we look at toxic, we say, what was that action or that behavior really toxic? Someone's trying to, if you're my brother and you come to me and say, JB, you you keep starting things, keep quitting. You got to stop doing this. You got to stop hanging there. You got to straighten up. I'm like, man, you always against me, man. You always saying something negative. You trying to help me out. You trying to help me do better. That's not toxic. That's
not toxic.
That's love.
Yeah, and the Bible says we're supposed to speak the truth in love.
You're right.
That's what it says.
So I was like, well, what really is toxic? Because we can't make it the catchphrase, the coin word today is. So really, that defining it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes trying to define or trying to pinpoint exactly what is toxicity can be somewhat of a difficult thing. And I think probably the simplest way to define what toxic is to look at how you was generationally raised, right? What are your family dynamics? What things goes against that dynamics? What things are healthy versus unhealthy? And I think that's where you really get into really defining what is toxic, when you pinpoint those things that are unhealthy. Toxicity can be, the spirit of drug abuse or verbal abuse, or the list can literally go on. And it doesn't even necessarily have to even be abuse. It can also be, the way that I experience you. If you're what I call nice nasty to me all the time, without trying to encourage me or trying to motivate me or trying to build me up, but you're constantly trying to tear me down.
Yeah.
That can be a form of toxicity, right? Because you're not trying to tell me something because you're encouraging me or you want to see me do better. You just want to tear me down because you want me to continue to be in that same state.
Right. And you're absolutely right. But one thing, also, I think, and we thought, we talked about this before. At least I saw it on your Facebook page when you presented this to some of your friends and family on Facebook. The conflict between what someone believes as Christian values, and being taken advantage of. So I believe people consider, because my Christian values mean I need to take whatever somebody gives me. I need to allow the abuse to happen. I need to allow the toxic person to remain in my life with access to me as if they weren't toxic. And to do anything otherwise would be a challenge to my Christian belief or my religious belief, because some other religions have that, my religious belief. And I believe that's a slippery slope to travel on, because you don't want to make out your religious belief to be a conduit for abuse, a conduit for being manipulated, a conduit for being underappreciated, from a toxic relationship with family. So I think that's one thing we need to be mindful of when we associate our religious beliefs with how we're being mistreated.
100%. Don't get me wrong. I think that religion can be a powerful tool, right? When used correctly. And I threw that in there because I get it, especially in Christianity. A lot of people interpret the word differently. And I wish that it was not so, right? I wish that we can all interpret the word the same and take it for what it's worth. But you and I both know that's just not the case all the time. And so I'm torn with that, a lot of people, when they look at what they should accept based off of not necessarily what the Bible says, but what they have traditionally been taught, that's a conflict. And I think, and that's a topic for another day, right? But I think that's one of those things that has to be dealt with, even in that sense, that we have to come to the mindset that some things that we were taught may not have been biblical, may not have been biblical whatsoever. Just because you was taught it does not mean that it is so. That's why the word says that you have to study the word for yourself. But I'm going to get off that subject.
Should I put that on the list of topics that we need to discuss?
I'm gonna get off that subject.
We both got quiet. We felt that. I need to add. I'm gonna add that to a list of topics we're gonna discuss.
Well, I haven't been in the pulpit in a minute now.
We'll title that. Is it really biblical? What would you do if you find out it's not? Or what were you?
What would you do when you? Yeah.
So,
and even that's a powerful statement. What would you do when you find out that what you were taught was not biblical? Man. But again, that's a topic for another day.
So, so I look at it, and I think there's levels too, right? So like, I'm, speaking of family, second, third, fourth cousins, yeah, you probably could cut them off, right? Pretty easier. First cousins are getting to that, like, yo, this is my first cousin. This is my aunt's child, aunt's children, uncle's children, uncle's child. A little different. When it gets to cutting off parents or your child, that's definitely where most people allow the rope to be very long before we get to that point to where I have no more rope for you. My kids are young, so it's hard for me to even imagine being in that place to where I have to consider even cutting a child of mine off. But I've seen it both ways, where a parent cut off a child or a child cut off a parent. That's a hard place to be. A lot of times, some of it's warranted because you don't want to enable that toxic behavior too, right? Like if I allow you to keep coming in my space being toxic, for instance, you said toxic behavior could be many things. It doesn't have to be any kind of drug abuse or something. But if your toxic behavior impacts my marriage as a parent, I can't allow my parent to be around my marriage
Mm-hmm.
without, always disrupting what I have with my wife,
Mm-hmm.
my significant other. So then now I have to decide, do I want you to disrupt what we have going on with my spouse for the sake of what we have as a parent and a child? Or do I say, well, at least in this aspect of my life, you have to get cut off?
Yeah.
I'll come see you.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Yeah. I will always waver on the side of I would have peace in my home. I would rather have peace in my home if it means that I'm giving up turmoil with my extended family.
Mm.
I would not bring that into my home. When I come into my home is my sanctuary, right? It's the place that I should be able to come into this domicile and be um, completely me. I should be able to be vulnerable with everybody within the confines of my home. I should be at peace in my home. If I'm letting what is going on, if I'm letting drama, if I'm letting uh, toxic things from a toxic family flow into my dwelling, that's an issue.
Yeah.
That's a big issue. So I agree that absolutely when dealing with toxic people, especially as it pertains to family, um, we do want to continue to extend that olive branch, right? Like I mentioned earlier, um, I never totally close a door. I never totally close the door. I keep it slightly ajar. There's always an olive branch. So um, if and when the condition presents itself, when the person who has been deemed toxic is ready to continue on a relationship, meeting the boundaries that has been established, we can press. We can pick this up like nothing's ever happened. Because, like I said, once I've forgiven you, you're forgiven. Doesn't mean that I forgot though. But
Hey,
that's another topic.
Forgive and forget. That's not scripture.
That's not scripture. I ain't never seen nowhere about where it says forgive and forget that it's ever happened. Somebody show me that. Somebody show me that.
Because you can't find it after all these years.
I ain't found it. Now, if I missed it, I'm open.
You know what I mean? But
I'm open. I hadn't seen it. But I'm definitely open if somebody can show me where it says forgive and forget forever.
But I think you made a great point, man, about cutting people off isn't a permanent thing. It doesn't have to be permanent. It could be a permanent thing.
It could.
It doesn't have to be a permanent thing. Reconciliation still can happen.
Absolutely.
And people have to understand what is at risk when I don't make separation between me and a toxic person and toxic behavior. What is at risk? Peace is at risk. Like you said, there's physical ramifications for being berated and abused by a toxic person, whether it's mental, spiritual, like your drain your soul, hurt your spirit, like we said, mental
emotional
time, stress happens when you're toxic, when you're around toxic people, toxic behavior, you really can't get that cleansing. And so I think people need to understand that it certainly is acceptable and at times necessary to cut people off. Whether reconciliation happens later or not is to be determined. But at this moment, at this time, I need to cut you off. I need to cut you off. And I think that's where I think you made a good point. And that's where people need to get that resolve to say, I have the power, I have the spirit, I have the strength to do it. Abusive relationships is one. Marriages, people are still in marriages getting abused because they don't have the strength or the resolve to cut it off. Um, children,
Yeah.
like, yeah, so there are times that it, cutting people off will save your life.
Yes.
And you can't take it. Definitely can't take that lightly.
Absolutely. And I don't want for people to think that that this is an easy process. And it is a process, which is why I carefully selected that word. Cutting people off, and especially when it's family, um, it's a process. And you're going to have those times where you're going to literally grieve the process. Cutting people off does not just affect the person that's being cut off, it affects you as well. But sometimes you have to endure those things for the sake of your health and your sanity, though. And I know right now that probably sounds like an oxymoron, right? Where, hey, I'm going to subject myself to more stress, more anguish, just so that I can cut this person out of my life. It's a process, though. So it's just like mourning the death of someone, not necessarily saying that person is dead to you, because I don't want to conflate the two. I'm not saying that the person is dead to you. And they shouldn't be dead to you. In fact, you should continue to pray for that person. You should continue to pray for even that reconciliation, that it could possibly happen one day. But it's a process. And so you're going to grieve that process. There's going to be times where you're going to probably miss whoever that person is that you're cutting off. You're going to miss them greatly. And even that can be somewhat of a mental anguish. But in the long run, if you have peace in your immediate family, if you have peace in your home, then I say that it is all worth it.
Oh, certainly, certainly. And in this process, understand, at least for me, using these I statements, if I cut a family member off, and this is where the family member has to understand this, and not just the family member, the rest of the family that is watching this and witnessing this. When I cut a family off, I didn't cut you off the moment I said something. Like I cut you off before you even knew it, before I even announced it.
Mm-hmm.
I cut you off when I was thinking about. I was already thinking about this. I was already wrestling with this. I've already asked people for advice about this. You know, I got through that process. So so it's not a spur of the moment reflex, decision, a reaction. This, like, hey, I started the process well before.
I grappled with this for a while.
Yeah. So at that point, they have to understand that, though, this thing was real. Like, this thing was a struggle, and here we are. And so now that we're here, and I'm telling you, and I pray that the expression in the notification is how Jesus would do it. So I pray when I say it well, but when I finally say it, though, that's like, that I can't be in the same place with you for a little bit.
Yeah.
Or for a long time, depending on what it is.
Yeah. So as you were talking about that, I began to think about some things, and one of those things is, for the family of the person who has cutting somebody off. I think oftentimes there's contention between the family and that person because of the person that they cut off. In my mind, instead of having contention against the person who has cut someone out of their life, then the family should probably try to reach out and figure out what is going on. And not just with the person who did the cutting, but the person who got cut out. What did you do? What was your part in this? And the other thing is, just because one person in the family was cut out does not mean the whole family was cut out. Just because my relationship with you is at a strain does not mean that my relationship with the rest of the family is at a strain, unless you want it to be at a strain, right? I think that shouldn't be lost. That just because one toxic person was cut out does not mean that I'm saying that everyone is toxic. Now, there could be that everybody may be toxic. It could be. But it doesn't necessarily mean that.
You got everybody off.
It could be. But but it's not necessarily that everybody is toxic. There just may be a select few.
Right.
So I don't want to get that to, let that to be missed in context. That I'm not saying that everyone in the family has to be cut out because one person was cut. That's all I have on that one.
It really don't. Really doesn't. And in closing, as we come to a close, we know it's a hard decision. Cutting people off is a hard decision. Shouldn't be taken lightly, but it shouldn't be ignored either. Toxic behavior is not healthy. Being around toxic people, being a toxic person, resting in the toxic environment, none of that is good for those that are involved. So we certainly ask everybody to take that in consideration. We, as family, we grew up where people say, they stayed in abusive relationships, stayed in this toxic friendships, whatever it may be. But you may have to make that hard decision. So we challenge you to look at the relationships in your lives. You have various relationships. We talk about family today, but you got friendship relationships, you got coworkers, you got all kinds of relationships. So we ask you to look at every relationship in your lives, and you will have to decide how to handle toxic people or toxic behavior. But one thing is for certain, you don't have to accept it. You figure out how you handle it. Maybe you address it straight up. Maybe you just go ahead and cut off immediately. I can't tell you, nor can Q tell you how to handle it. This is just our opinions, but you handle it the best way you can. But what we can say is you don't have to accept it. You don't have to accept toxic behavior for family. You don't have to accept it for your religion. You don't have to accept it for your own comfort and character. Toxic behavior is toxic, and you don't have to accept it. Address it, do something about it, handle it the best you can, but don't accept it. You're too valuable for that. Know your worth, know how you should be treated. We always say when we're growing up, you have to train people how to treat you. So if you accept it, they're going to keep on doing it. If you don't accept it, you're going to be worried about the next time they try to do it. I felt like I preached a little bit, almost said amen. So once again, thanks for listening to What's on Our Mind. Come join us next week as we discuss, is the church still relevant in the 21st century? Is the church still relevant in the 21st century? This is Microphone Check with J and Q. Like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace, patience, power, and prosperity.